Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports and it's Mock Draft Monday here with our preseason edition of my first 2025 NBA mock draft here on the channel leading into this 2025 NBA draft cycle. I'm extremely excited to be back covering another NBA draft, extremely blessed, extremely excited. I've already been putting in a ton of time, a ton of hours watching NBL prospects over in Europe, prospects obviously playing collegiate basketball this year. We also have some G League prospects we're going to talk about today. It is a very strong, very interesting draft class. I'm extremely excited for it. If you guys are looking forward to all of the content throughout the entire draft cycle this upcoming year, be sure to leave a like on today's video. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future uploads if you are not already subscribed. Let's jump into that video preview here. The draft order today is roughly decided by kind of my early predictions for this upcoming season. Here's a disclaimer, I'm not going to be 100% correct, not in the actual mock draft and not in the actual order. Obviously, injuries will shake things up, and obviously there's going to be a couple of instances where maybe I had a team a little bit better than I thought they were going to be, or maybe a team's a little bit worse than I was expecting as well. That's definitely possible. So don't worry too much about the draft order. It's just kind of a loose ranking. I didn't spend hours and hours and hours crafting the order. Obviously, I spent hours and hours and hours crafting the landing spots. That's typically what I put most of the work into. And then throughout the year, I use the standings, but preseason edition, no standings currently. So just kind of my rough predictions. And obviously, they're going to change. Remember, this is the beginning of the NCAA season. This is also the beginning stages of the NBL, European play. Teams like Ratiopharm have just recently started play, as well as some of the NBL teams like the Brisbane Bullets. They just got past the Blitz, and now they're jumping into their season. So without further ado, let's jump into the actual mock draft here now. And the team I have selecting first overall in this rendition of my 2025 NBA mock draft is the Washington Wizards. This is a dream come true for the Washington Wizards after selecting Alex Sarr second overall in the 2024 NBA draft. Having the first overall selection in 2025 would poise them and position themselves in a spot to build their front court of the future, with Sarr such a unique defensive prospect coming into this past draft cycle. We'll see how his rookie year goes. I think there's going to be some ups and some downs for sure, but adding the premier prospect, the premier blue chip player in this 2025 NBA draft cycle in Cooper Flagg would do wonders, not only for the current iteration of Wizards basketball, but mostly for the long-term outlook of the Washington Wizards franchise and organization. The Wizards, really since the draft pick of John Wall, have not had that build-around core piece. John Wall had some tremendous All-NBA caliber seasons for the Wizards throughout his career. Flagg as a prospect is very, very enticing, not only for his physical traits, which really jump out anytime you turn on the tape watching Cooper Flagg. His defensive dominance really highlights his athleticism to be such a strong elite defender. You typically need great anticipatory skills, which he has, really tremendous athleticism, which he obviously possesses with his leaping ability, the ability to leave the floor as quickly as he does and still get as much height on his vertical. It's just impressive to watch. He's a very active defender. He's going to be able to get in the passing lanes. He's going to be able to make plays as a chase down shot blocker. Not LeBron James-esque, but very, very impressive and honestly scary sometimes with how high he's able to get up off the floor as a shot blocker. And he has the will and the want to do it on a frequent basis, which is one of the most impressive things about him as a prospect. Very rarely do you see someone with a number one overall pick type of skill set and a number one overall pick type of want to. Comparing him to previous number one overall pick, someone like a DeAndre Ayton, there's just a significant difference from a mentality approach, in my opinion, from Cooper Flagg to a DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton had a lot of talent, obviously all the size in the world, a lot of the potential to live up to maybe becoming one of the better big men in the NBA, but the want to hasn't always been there for DeAndre Ayton. I think that's very fair to say, and Cooper Flagg I think is going to be the complete opposite story. He is someone who wants to dominate. We've seen him in Team USA scrimmages being a real contributor against the Anthony Davises of the world, against some of the better NBA players who obviously just went and won a gold medal in the Olympics this past year. Cooper Flagg is going to be a standout NBA player, predominantly for what he does on the defensive end of the floor, his ability to operate as a play finisher. I think as he grows as a cutter, I think having the ball in his hands a little bit less frequently than what he did at Montverde Academy and in EYBL play playing for Maine United, I think that he's going to be really, really well positioned in the NBA to kind of toggle between on-ball and off-ball responsibilities. And I think that's been a real growing, kind of concern prior to the last couple of years at Montverde, was how much could he be an on-ball creator. And I think the last couple of years have really quelled some of those concerns because of his growth, his improvement as an on-ball shooter off the dribble, as well as his ability to create downhill. I think one of the most important things to mention covering Cooper Flagg as a scoring prospect is his contact balance. As he drives downhill, his ability to absorb, play through, and finish around traffic and into traffic because of his strength, his functional athleticism, and the ability to play off of 2 feet in those settings really stands out to me every time I watch him play. He's going to be the first overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. I would bet a lot of money on it right now if I were you, because it just feels like a really safe, obvious option. He's going to have a good year at Duke. He's probably going to be the most impactful Duke Blue Devil on the roster, and that's if he finishes 3rd, 4th in scoring. He'll probably still be the most impactful. That's how good of a player he is. The passing feel is there, the size, athleticism, the combination of everything you're really looking for in a number 1 overall pick is there with Cooper Flagg. Now, would I go as far as saying generational? Not quite. I think, I reserve the word generational for prospects like Victor Wembanyama and LeBron James. So for me, I'm not exactly there on Cooper Flagg being a generational prospect, but he's a really, really, really darn good one, and very, very worthy of the number 1 overall pick in probably 90+% of the NBA drafts throughout history. Moving on to pick number 2, the Brooklyn Nets find themselves here after trading away Mikal Bridges, reacquiring their own first-round pick in a kind of complicated 3-way trade with the New York Knicks and Houston Rockets. The Nets now find themselves with an actual direction, which is really, really good for this organization. A team that really had a lot of questions and concerns going forward around a roster that just flat out wasn't good enough. They've kind of dialed back the talent a little bit. This is now Cam Thomas and Nick Claxton's team. It's going to lead to a lot of regular season losses, especially in year 1, year 2 of this rebuild recycle. But I think the long-term goal here for Brooklyn is to position themselves that in 4 or 5 years they have a ton of homegrown talent, a lot of scoring potential on their roster, and a lot of athleticism around Claxton, around Cam Thomas. And I think they're going to be in a position where right now they don't really have a lot of great players, obviously, but 3-4 years from now, I think we're going to see a real semblance of a quality team there in Brooklyn, and a team that is going to be young, fun, exciting, enticing, and as long as they draft well, they could be a very fascinating team within the next half decade. With the second pick in the 2025 NBA draft, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting forward Ace Bailey from Rutgers. The Northeast kid stays in the Northeast with the Brooklyn Nets and will have a chance to play right there at the Barclays Center, not far from Rutgers at all. And I think for Nets fans, especially when we talk about homegrown talent, this is an extremely exciting opportunity for the Nets. Now, yes, you would love to get Cooper Flagg. You'd love to get the main event of this draft cycle, right? But the Nets, 2nd overall, you don't get Cooper Flagg, but you get this really polarizing, intriguing upside prospect. And in my opinion, the prospect with the most to lose this upcoming NCAA season. I think Ace Bailey, someone who I think right now has a lot of talent evaluators' eyes on him because of the long-term upside that is perceived through the combination of shot making, athletic display. He's one of the most athletic players in this upcoming draft cycle, especially with his overall bounce, the explosion toward the rim, and some real creativity and flair as well as a scorer and as a finisher. There's really no such thing as a yellow light or a red light for him. He is a green light player, which means at times when he's on fire, it is unbelievable. You think about some of his high school 40-point games that he dropped, including one at Rutgers during a tournament. He's an unbelievably talented scoring prospect, but with the absence of that yellow or red light, there's also going to be stretches where maybe he's not the most efficient prospect in this upcoming draft. And will that scare some evaluators away? I think there's a lot of work for Ace Bailey to put in terms of his footwork. I think he needs to get a little bit stronger yet. I think obviously very wiry, gifted athletically for sure, but he needs to add some of that functional strength. And like I talked about with contact balance for Cooper Flagg, that is most definitely an area that Ace Bailey needs to improve upon to become an efficient, very reliable scorer in the NBA. I think right now all of the intrigue is there. A lot of the upside, the first step, the quickness, the athleticism, the shot-making upside, all very apparent when you watch Ace Bailey. I think defensively, he's going to become a good playmaker on the defensive end of the floor with, again, his athleticism. But I think there's a real area of growth as well when it comes to his feel. One thing that separates, for me, Cooper Flagg from Ace Bailey in this draft cycle, Cooper Flagg has, I think, better anticipation skills. I think he also has kind of a better understanding of what team offenses are trying to accomplish. And you saw that for Cooper Flagg working out of the middle of the floor against zones for Montverde Academy en route to another national title. Whereas for Ace Bailey, working out of the middle didn't always mean he's going to pass the basketball. It usually meant he's going to pass, face up, and look for his own shot, which isn't a bad thing. You like to see that aggression. But I think from a feel perspective, Ace Bailey is just a little bit behind Cooper Flagg in pretty much every single area of basketball when it comes to the defensive feel, when it comes to the anticipation, when it comes to the offensive feel as a passer, facilitator, decision maker. I think Ace Bailey probably has a couple of years to grow yet before we really see him starting to become a reliable offensive option for an NBA team, which is okay because, again, Brooklyn's perception here and their long-term plan is to be bad presently, to become good down the road. And I think that is going to be sustainable even if you draft Ace Bailey, but it is going to be a little bit more of a project than even most people I think are projecting right now. Now, there's also going to be nights during his rookie year where he is just tremendous, phenomenal, but if he does have a kind of lackluster or bad college season where he shoots maybe in the 30s for a field goal percentage, high 30s, like 38, 39, maybe even 40, 41% from the field, people are going to have some concerns, obviously, and that could impact his draft stock, making him fall from pick number 2. But right now, before the season starts, I still am projecting him second overall. But I do think with where he currently sits, Cooper Flagg is almost a lock for me, number 1. Like 99.9% sure he will be the first overall pick. Right now, I'm about 65% certain Ace Bailey will be the second overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. But that could really change if he doesn't have an elite college season. Pick number 3, the Utah Jazz now find themselves in this spot after extending Lauri Markkanen. Some of you might be surprised to have me kind of this low on the Utah Jazz. Now, while Lauri Markkanen is a near all-star caliber player, or maybe even just flat out an all-star caliber player, the team is laden with young players. And as a result, when you're playing Keontae George and Isaiah Collier 48 minutes of point guard play, when you're playing Taylor Hendricks a ton of minutes this upcoming year, when you're playing Cody Williams a lot of minutes, the team's going to be young, inexperienced, and likely bad. So while I do think Utah has a ton of talent and a lot of intrigue going forward, I think this upcoming season, their way of tanking is going to be just flat out through playing their young players. I think at some point we'll see them trade Jordan Clarkson. Very possible we could see them trade Collin Sexton. It'll be a very fascinating situation to monitor here in Utah. But I think third overall, the Utah Jazz at this moment in time would look point guard and select Nolan Traore from France. He's an intriguing prospect as well. And part of the reason why I'm not 100% sold that Ace Bailey will no matter what be the second overall pick is because of the presence of other really awesome draft prospects. And that's one of the beautiful things about 2025 and this upcoming draft cycle is there's a lot of really good top end talent. Cooper Flagg obviously is the main prize, the main ticket for this draft. But outside of just Cooper Flagg, there's other great players. You've got Nolan Traore here, who I'm mentioning for the Utah Jazz at this spot. Obviously, Ace Bailey, who we've talked about. There's other names we're going to talk about here coming up at pick 4, 5, and 6 as well, who are real options to go in the top 2 or 3 in this year's draft. But right now, Traore, the French guard, has a lot of the eyes on him after a really strong end of the season last year, where he ended up pouring in 40-plus point games rather consistently. In fact, set a record last year for his age group in the league he was playing in for points in a championship game where he scored 45 points. And when his jump shot's falling from the perimeter, he is devastating, but I think a lot of his game is predicated on his quickness downhill, the ability to make reads with the live dribble, his playmaking, his handle. Those will be the areas that present the most emphasis for his draft value. And I think looking at a point guard prospect with feel, quickness, solid positional size, he is going to be a very intriguing option for a team like Utah. Yes, they do have some guards right now. Keyonte George, who I look at as more of a combo guard. Obviously, Utah's kind of given him the keys to being the point guard, and we have seen progression in that area. I'm not certain he can be your franchise point guard long term, but maybe with another year of development, I could be wrong on that. But it's an interesting spot here for Utah because with the top available remaining prospects, in my opinion, at this point in time, being predominant ball handling guards, it puts Utah in a little bit of a tricky spot of who to add if, say, for example, Keyonte George is the long-term point guard. We'll see what happens with Isaiah Collier. I wasn't super high on him in his own draft last year, but maybe he pops as a rookie. We'll see what happens. They're definitely going to give him that opportunity. But the Jazz here getting Nolan Traore, a player who I think is going to build upon a really good end of the year last year, go into this year and really solidify himself as a top 3, potentially top 2 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Utah gets their franchise point guard and a long-term running mate with Lauri Markkanen there, where the playmaking and play finishing combination could be really, really strong together in Utah. Pick number 4, the Portland Trailblazers now at this spot, I think have a very unique opportunity to add, again, more talent to their roster after trading for Deni Avdija, a player who I think is a tremendous fit there in Portland. They did, give up 2 first-round picks to do that trade. Obviously, a little bit of a risk sending out Carlton Carrington in that trade with Washington, essentially from the draft pick component, and then also a future pick. Portland did take a swing on their current roster. They also added Donovan Clingan, who I really liked as well in round 1. I think that they did get a lot better. Now, again, just like I mentioned with Utah, they are very young still. The guard spots with Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson are not going to be very great defensively, especially Simons, who is probably, from a large minutes perspective, one of the worst defenders in the entire NBA. Portland has some work to do to improve their roster still long term, and I think one of the big questions for me is, will Anthony Simons actually be in Portland for the long-term foreseeable future? And my answer to that is probably not. So with the 4th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft, the Portland Trailblazers select guard Ben Saraf from Ratiopharm Ulm. Saraf is an interesting prospect who is Israeli. So they already went out and got one Israeli player in Deni Avdija. They're going to grab another one here in Ben Saraf, a player who I am very, very intrigued by and very excited about going into this 2025 NBA draft cycle. He is a left-handed ball-dominant guard who can play make off of a live dribble, has really good playmaking instincts, especially to the weak side of the floor. One of the first things I look for evaluating prospects, especially primary ball handlers or secondary ball handlers, is their ability to utilize and weaponize the weak side of the court. And what do I mean by that? For someone like Saraf, who is a very ball-dominant player, someone who can handle the basketball, get to spots, and operate as a scorer, it is essential that he is able to beat help defenders. And it's not just about beating help defenders with, quickness, athleticism. That's something Nolan Traore maybe will do a little bit better than Ben Saraf. A little bit quicker, a little bit more decisive as an athlete. Saraf, I think, has a little bit of that playmaking feel that you require, especially at 6'6", as a potential lead guard option long term. There is a ton of upside here because of his ability to play make, pass to the opposite side of the floor, and really beat help defenses. Not only just beating one help defender, but beating team defenses that are in rotation. He can make weak side skip passes to the corner. He can make weak side skip passes up to the wing. He can also make strong side corner kicks, which is, again, pretty simple in development, but the fact that he's been able to demonstrate at a high level the ability to weaponize all areas of the floor as a passer really complements his scoring gravity, his scoring ability. The handle is really what intrigues me the most about Ben Saraf. I think his ability to dribble the basketball, create separation out of isolation, and then also play out of the pick and roll, absorbing space. That's one of the things that really stands out to me as well about Saraf. Not only does he create space with his handle, but he also has the IQ and the understanding of how to take space. So when he does either beat his guy off the dribble or work in the pick and roll, he understands what areas of the floor he needs to get his body to either put pressure on the big man as a helper in the pick and roll, or to get into that open space and look for his own shot. And I think off of that, the playmaking feel, the handle, the scoring gravity, the scoring ability as well. You think about his time playing for Israel in the FIBA U18 European championships. He was tremendous. Ended up winning MVP honors. He was just brilliant in that, both as a scorer and then off of his scoring gravity as a facilitator. I think Saraf is someone who, after a really strong debut game for Ratiopharm Ulm, he's in a position here to really solidify himself as an early lottery pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Again, positional size, playmaking feel, scoring gravity, live ball handling capabilities, and a real competitive streak as well as a defensive playmaker, someone who wants to win, someone who is very engaged defensively when he has to be, and when it comes down to making winning plays. I think Saraf's going to be a player throughout his entire NBA career that just consistently does that. I think this is a huge home run pick here for Portland, 4th overall. Pick number 5, we have the Detroit Pistons here at this spot. Detroit's interesting. I don't really know where to place this team when it comes to a win-loss record. Last year they were so bad, but their roster shouldn't be that bad, and not having Monty Williams anymore helps them as well. Just likely win more games. So we'll see what happens here with Detroit. I'm extremely excited about the outlook of this team still. I know that might be a hot take at this point in time, but Jalen Duren's only 20 years old. I think Monty Williams did a real disservice to him with their pick-and-roll team defense last year. It made Jalen Duren look like a really, really bad defender. I think Duren still has the upside to be a great defender. It just comes down to having the right coaching and the right structure around him to really maximize him. The team still doesn't have a lot of great point-of-attack screen navigation, so there's still going to be a lot of moments where Duren is pushed out onto an island a little bit, trying to guard 2 guys at once because of the screen navigation that he is stuck around. But Cade Cunningham projects to still be one of the top 30-35 players in the NBA again this upcoming season. I'm still a big believer in Jaden Ivey. I'm not selling my stock on him at all. He is a potential star in the making still. Whether that takes a change of scenery or just the new coaching staff to figure that out, we'll see what happens. But I'm still very, very much in on Jaden Ivey, very much in on Jalen Duren. Still love Cade Cunningham as a player, and I think Detroit looking to surround those players with more talent. Again, this is where it's a little tricky. The best player available, in my opinion, at this point in time is another ball handling guard. Can Detroit really fit that in? I don't think they're in a spot to pass on talent. So 5th overall, I have the Detroit Pistons selecting Dylan Harper out of Rutgers. And yes, this is very, very complicated, very weird, because they also have Marcus Sasser. They have a bunch of different guards on their roster. Do they really need Dylan Harper? No. This is a likely trade spot if it came down to it, where Detroit can maybe push this pick out to get multiple future firsts, or maybe move down a little bit in the draft, maybe fall down with a team like San Antonio who would move up for a Dylan Harper type player. We'll see what happens, right? I don't have mock trades in this video. I'm going to talk about them periodically. Like, I think Detroit could trade out of this pick. I think OKC has 4 firsts will definitely make some type of trade on draft night like Sam Presti always does. But Dylan Harper here, he's just best player available. BPA for Detroit, a team that, listen, if they're picking 5th overall again, it's either because they were just not good again this season, or they were really, really not good, right? And then fell down in the lottery. So I just think if Detroit's picking 5th overall, like, you just get talent if you're still drafting, and if you aren't picking at this spot, like, you're probably making a trade. So there's not really a lot to break down here. I do like Dylan Harper's game. Again, another player who I think if he was a little bit quicker, a little bit more explosive with his handle, I could see him moving maybe up into that top 3 conversation. We'll see how the year at Rutgers goes. Again, I talked about Ace Bailey and the potential for him to either have a great year and solidify himself as a top 2 pick, or maybe if he has a bad year, does he fall down? We'll see, because if Ace Bailey has a bad year and Dylan Harper has a great year, maybe Harper could even supplant Ace Bailey in the top 3. I don't think that's super likely, but you know, you never know. I wanted to mention that as a possibility if things go a certain way at Rutgers, which I don't expect them to be honest. But if they do, you know, maybe Dylan Harper moves up into the top 3, top 4 picks again in this year's draft cycle. Pick number 6, the Charlotte Hornets here at this spot. I do think the Hornets are going to be better than they were last year. I think just having LaMelo Ball healthy is going to go a long way in hopefully helping them win games. Now we'll see how many games LaMelo Ball is healthy for. That's one of the biggest questions. Point blank, I didn't love the selection of Tidjane Salaam last year, but I think with where the current NBA is sitting right now, obviously I understand the desire to add, you know, athletic size. There's obviously a real role for that type of player in the NBA right now, and the potential is there with Salaam. I just wasn't as enamored with him as a prospect as others seem to be, but I do understand what Charlotte was looking at and what they were trying to envision next to LaMelo Ball and next to Brandon Miller long term, so I do get it. But 6th overall here in the 2025 NBA draft, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting guard VJ Edgecombe from Baylor. And this is a really exciting prospect for me, someone who, again, has that top 5, top 4-ish potential in this year's draft. I think he's going to have a really fun, awesome season for Baylor this upcoming year. He's an explosive athlete. He's got shot-making upside, shot-making potential. For Charlotte, a couple of years ago, I did push for them to draft Scoot Henderson. And look, Brandon Miller was tremendous as a rookie. Brandon Miller's a really great player. I even pre-draft in his own draft cycle, I said he had all-NBA potential. My words got twisted. People think I don't like Brandon Miller as a prospect, which isn't true. I just preferred others over him because I prefer playmaking and guard play oftentimes, especially when it comes to certain teams that when Charlotte didn't have LaMelo Ball, I think we saw the absence of playmaking on their roster and just how bad overall their ball movement was and some of the issues that they had with LaMelo Ball off the floor. Now, Brandon Miller's still a great player. Now that they have him, it is going to be about adding more playmaking, more ball handling talent, in my opinion. That's where someone like VJ Edgecombe comes into play because he gives you that downhill rim attack with the athleticism. He gives you some of that playmaking feel, the live ball handling that they need still. They didn't get any of this with Tidjane Salaün. They did get defensive upside, defensive potential, maybe some floor spacing upside as well. We'll see how Salaün looks to develop over the next couple of years. But I think Charlotte, an interesting situation right now. I like the way that they've been moving. They've acquired a bunch of 2027 first-round picks. They've really reshuffled their cards a little bit without sacrificing too much of their current roster, in my opinion. Like trading PJ Washington, I do not think hurt Charlotte at all. So I think the Hornets are in a spot currently where, and trading Terry Rozier did not hurt them either, in my opinion. So I think adding VJ Edgecombe and seeing where they go over the next couple of years would be really, really strong for the Hornets around LaMelo Ball, around, of course, Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller as well. We'll see what happens with Mark Williams. Still really high on him as well. I do like his game quite a bit. So we'll see where Charlotte goes. We'll see if Mark Williams can stay healthy. But the Hornets do have a really nice young infrastructure. If things go well and if they stay on the court playing, things could be pretty promising over the next couple of years for the Hornets. Pick number 7, the San Antonio Spurs. Now at this spot, I think the Spurs are such an interesting team to talk about here because Victor Wembanyama, first of all, is good enough to start winning games big time right now. Victor Wembanyama is going to be an all-NBA caliber player. What I think San Antonio internally is trying to do, though, is continue to lose games. You might say, well, wait a minute. They brought in Chris Paul. They brought in Harrison Barnes. Why would they get these veterans if they're trying to lose games? Look, this isn't 2018. This isn't even 2020. We're in 2024, about to be going into 2025. Harrison Barnes is like a mediocre player in the NBA right now. Chris Paul was coming off the bench for a team that missed the playoffs last year. Those two guys are not good enough to elevate this team to anywhere near the Western Conference playoffs, okay? Victor Wembanyama is going to try as hard as he possibly can to drag them there because he's going to be the best rim protector in the NBA and probably the most freakish, if not the most freakish, the second most behind Giannis, offensive player in the league as well. Victor Wembanyama is really, really good, which is why I don't think the Spurs will have a top 3 pick. I think they'll find themselves somewhere in the middle of the lottery, anywhere from 7 to 10. They're going to play a bunch of young guys. Jeremy Sohan still. You obviously have Stefan Castle, who's going to play probably a good amount of minutes. The Spurs team is still relatively thin, very, very young. And I think even though Wemby's ready to start winning right now, the rest of the roster is not in the spot to really help him achieve his team goals going into the season, which is okay. I think this is best case scenario for San Antonio long term because I would, if I were them, want to continue drafting very high in the lottery if possible to continue surrounding Victor Wembanyama with other talent going into future years where once you guys do make the playoffs, you're looking at a team that can really compete because of the overall collection of top-end talent around Victor Wembanyama. 7th overall, I have the Spurs selecting wing Hugo Gonzalez from Spain, another player who is multifaceted in his perimeter talent, someone who has a live handle, can make plays off of a dribble. Obviously, the shot mechanics and especially the three-point shooting as well is really an area where we need to see him take, I think, a big step forward. But from a 6'6 wing with the ability to dribble and handle the basketball, make plays off the bounce, and score as a rim attacker with really solid athleticism, I think emerging footwork as well. Hugo Gonzalez, who will be playing for Real Madrid this year again, Just looks like a very intriguing prospect and someone who I could see San Antonio eyeing, especially given, I think, some of their wing questions on the roster currently. Is Keldon Johnson a real part of their long-term plans in the future? How does that look to develop? How does that change over the next couple of years? We'll see. But I think Hugo Gonzalez, with his ability to handle, play make, and then also potentially shoot after his play finishing capabilities, this is the type of player you'd probably want to put around Victor Wembanyama. The more playmaking, the more feel, the more IQ, the better. I think with the way the international game has really trended over the last couple of years, with France becoming a powerhouse, more European players coming over to the NBA than ever before, honestly. And not just like the draft and stash version. I'm talking like, how many lottery picks are European over the last couple of years is just really, really impressive, including the first 2 picks in the 2024 NBA draft being French, in both Reece Shea and Sarr. I think with Gonzalez here, another European player where the feel IQ is just off the charts, and honestly, international players are just further along than most US-born players are in their development from a skill set perspective coming into the NBA, and I think Gonzalez is another example of that here, 7th overall for San Antonio. Number 8, the Toronto Raptors here now at this spot, the sole international team in the NBA with a chance to add talent. Now, last year they weren't able to draft in the first round after their pick conveyed to the Spurs. The Spurs obviously traded out of that pick, which ended up becoming Robert Dillingham to the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Raptors now need this pick, I think, really, really badly. I do think the Raptors have a pretty interesting collection of talent. With RJ Barrett, they have Bruce Brown, who they're likely going to trade. Scotty Barnes is, of course, the face of the franchise, the all-star player for them, and will likely be one again this upcoming year. He's just dominant. I wouldn't be shocked if he led the Raptors in points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals this upcoming season. He does everything for Toronto. I can't talk enough about how good Scotty Barnes is. And if you go back to my actual evaluation on Scotty Barnes pre-draft in his own draft cycle, I gave the Raptors an A+ pick, even though I think a lot of people were expecting Jalen Suggs to be the selection for Toronto at the time. I loved Scotty Barnes as a prospect, and I think Toronto, even with some of their questions on the roster, having Scotty Barnes is just such a strong beginning piece that whoever they draft here, as long as the player doesn't just completely fall out and flame out of the league, it's another core building block to put around Scotty Barnes because of his multifaceted approach. You have a lot of optionality to building your roster. I think the way that we'll expect Masai Ujiri to operate, though, is looking at size. Jakob Poeltl, we'll see what his long-term future looks like there in Toronto. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. So 8th overall, I have the Toronto Raptors selecting center Khaman Maluach from Duke, the former Basketball African League product. Is kind of raw, to be completely honest with you. I think the feel as a perimeter defender, I think the feel mostly in the pick and roll defensively is going to be an interesting thing to monitor this year for Duke. I think Shire, Coach Shire there for the Blue Devils, has a lot of different options to employ defensively with the size with Cooper Flagg and obviously Maluach and some of the other pieces he has on that roster, which is really, really talented. I'm excited to see how Duke looks to kind of shift things around defensively, and if Maluach can keep up with that as well from an IQ standpoint defensively. He's a very intriguing player, though. Some real shot-making upside. Can he become a stretch big man in the NBA? That would be very fascinating to see if he's able to accomplish that or not. He's got the size. He's got the ability to play as a lob finisher. That's something we've already seen him doing with Tyrese Proctor on some of the Duke scrimmages that their actual team has posted up on YouTube themselves. Maluach, from a size, athleticism, upside perspective, very, very fascinating. From a present day feel, is he good enough to be a starter day one of his career? Probably not. But I think Toronto here are a team with a lot of long-term questions. It's about talent, it's about upside. Maluach gives them some of those characteristics, I think, that would be very, very exciting to see develop and emerge around a Scotty Barnes-led team in the future. Pick number 9, the Chicago Bulls here now. The Eastern Conference, man, it's an interesting race for sure. The Bulls and Hawks, you can almost pencil into play-in berth again without them actually being any real contending team in the playoffs, because they would have almost no chance against any of the top Eastern Conference teams, in my opinion. I do think Josh Giddey's going to have a good year. In fact, probably in line to maybe win Most Improved Player of the Year. He's going to have a really strong season, I think, for Chicago. But the Bulls themselves are not really a team that's well positioned to win a lot of games right now. I think they need more shooting. I think they need more long-term wing play after losing DeMar DeRozan. And they also need center play. But with Maluach now off the board at 8, I don't really see the Bulls taking a center at number 9. So, 9th overall, I have the Chicago Bulls selecting forward Liam McNeeley from UConn. McNeeley was a pretty instrumental piece in Montverde winning the national championship again with Cooper Flagg. McNeeley was probably the most reliable, best floor spacer there for Montverde Academy this past year. His ability to play off the catch as a catch-and-shoot option was really, really essential for them, provided them with good three-point shot making, and honestly had some really timely baskets along the way as well. And I think McNeeley going to UConn, he ended up flipping his commitment, remember, and choosing to go to UConn, I think, is going to pay him a lot of money down the road. I know people are thinking about NIL right now. I'm talking about NBA money. I think his decision to go play for Coach Hurley and the UConn Huskies was genius. Think about the types of players that Dan Hurley's coached. He coached Donovan Clingan, a rim-protecting big man. He coached Jordan Hawkins, a real movement shooter with some off-the-bounce shot-making upside, right? You look at Tristan Newton, a ball-handling point guard. You look at Stephon Castle, kind of a two-way guard/wing combo that doesn't really have like a premier top day one skill, but has a very well-rounded game. Dan Hurley is a mastermind of basketball, and he knows how to utilize every single type of player he has in his program. So when you get a player who is so talented off the catch like Liam McNeeley, I could see UConn reverting back to kind of their offense a couple of years ago with Jordan Hawkins when they won their first national title of the last 2. I think with McNeeley flying off of pin downs, flying off of flare screens, using him in Spain action, using him in certain different kinds of looks throughout their offense, which is always very unique. There's elevator sets, there's just, the list goes on, right? You think about their misdirection plays, everything UConn does just ends up working because Hurley is a genius. And I think McNeeley is going to be very well suited to benefit from those sets, benefit from those types of actions, and then ultimately find himself in a spot to really help his draft stock and solidify himself as a top 10 pick in the draft because of solid positional size. He's a solid athlete, and again, the shooting is the value here for Chicago. Putting this type of player around Josh Giddey, extremely exciting for me, and I think for the Bulls especially, just getting more perimeter shot making, more perimeter scoring talent could go a long way in helping this team improve its overall team composition over the next couple of years. Pick number 10, we move on to the San Antonio Spurs. This pick comes from the Atlanta Hawks, part of the DeJounte Murray trade, which obviously did not pan out so well for Atlanta, who is now playing in New Orleans. DeJounte Murray, shout out to you, man. 10th overall, the San Antonio Spurs select guard Dink Pate from the G League. So, former G League Ignite product obviously will not be playing with G League Ignite this year because they shut down the program, but he will be playing for another G League team throughout the year. And I think with Pate especially, some of his best games for G League Ignite came with a very high volume ball usage, where he has the basketball in his hands a lot, and he's making plays off the live dribble, getting into his mid-range pull-up, and kind of playing within a rhythm. And I think that'll be one of the most fascinating things to watch for this year when he's not part of the G League Ignite program, but playing on more of a naturally built roster, a naturally built team. How much does he find himself with the basketball? Is he a true guard? Is he a wing? Because if he's a wing, I think the value is significantly less for Dink Pate. If he is a guard, that positional size becomes so much more important, you think, playing at 6'6", and it kind of reminds me of the Dyson Daniels situation. Not that they're the same prospect at all, because Dyson Daniels was predominantly, a playmaking defense first type of player, and then Dink Pate on the opposite end of the spectrum, kind of more of that shot making upside that you look for in a scoring guard. That's what made Dyson Daniels not intriguing to me. I didn't think Dyson Daniels was a point guard. So yes, even though Dyson Daniels had good positional size as a guard, if you don't project him to be a guard in the NBA, it's not going to work as well as you would maybe think in theory being a 6'6" guard, right? It's not like you're going to post up your point guard a whole bunch anyway. That's not 1980 anymore. So I think the differences in how the game has evolved has made positional size at some points more important. You think about shooting over smaller defenders, shooting more threes, and obviously the ability to not have to help as much because you have maybe a shot blocking guard. Think about Derek White in Boston and how that alleviates some of the pressure for rim protection that the Celtics sometimes don't have if Porzingis is either out of the game or off the floor in certain situations. But when we're thinking about someone like Dink Pate, like it still comes down to the offensive side of the floor. And if he's able to have the ball in his hands a lot, like how valuable is that? Is he good enough to lead a team that way? I think this is like an upside swing here for San Antonio. They already got Hugo Gonzalez. They have Stephon Castle. This is like if Dink Pate hits, oh my goodness, we're crazy good. But if he doesn't, he could be like a rotational player off the bench for them. And that doesn't sound super exciting. It doesn't sound super enticing. But I think there is enough to bet on some of that shot-making upside, the dribble pull-up, and especially his kind of feel for the game a little bit as a ball handler, decision-maker. I think we've seen real improvements in that area as well from him in the last 12 months or so. So it'll be fascinating going into this year. I think he's someone who could really elevate his stock if he has a great season, but ultimately probably won't completely cripple his stock if he doesn't. Could probably see him as a likely first-round lock at this point in time. But you never know. Things can change and shift and alter over the course of the season. So we'll have to keep our eyes on Dink Pate for sure. Pick number 11, the Golden State Warriors here now at this spot. I think the Warriors had a really weird offseason, losing Klay Thompson, bringing in Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton. They got better in some ways for sure, but they lost such a core piece of their dynasty in Klay Thompson, losing him to Dallas. I think, even though you replace him with Buddy Hield, there is just a difference between those two players. Not that Buddy Hield's a terrible shooter by any stretch of the imagination. He's an elite one. But they're just different. And I think Golden State's going to have a little bit of a learning curve on how that works. Buddy Hield, a lot of his shooting is around the basketball as a ghost screener, whereas a lot of Klay Thompson's was off of floppy action, a lot of off-ball movement where he's away from the basketball. So I think there's just going to be a little bit of a learning curve. But I think that's okay. Golden State, I still do like some of their pieces. Kyle Anderson's going to help them a lot defensively, I think. But they are lacking size. And that's exactly what they're going to address here. 11th overall, the Golden State Warriors select Rocco Zikarsky from the Brisbane Bullets, the 7'3" big man. Very interesting prospect to me. I'm really intrigued. When I watch him play, it gets me excited about a lot of things, but it also gets me a little concerned about some of the other things. And he's not like Zach Edey. He really isn't. Zach Edey has such rim gravity, such kind of... His touch around the rim especially is what separates Edey from a guy like Zikarsky. Now, Zikarsky's a couple of years younger and just a little bit of a different prospect. I think Zikarsky has better rim protection elements. He plays vertically a little bit better. I think he's going to be more of a rim deterrent even than Zach Edey is, even though Edey is pretty good in that type of role as well. I think Zikarsky, that's really the name of the game for him as a draft prospect. Rim deterrence defensively. He's super tall, super lengthy, and he presents himself vertically very, very well as a help side defender and someone who just deters people from the rim, like I said with the word rim deterrent. And that's what he's going to provide to whatever team does draft him. Now, I do think there are going to be some real flaws with him, though, defensively, too. You think about playing some of the premier players in the NBA right now, the Luka Doncic's, the Damian Lillard's, obviously if he got drafted to Golden State, it would hide him from this, but Steph Curry's of the world. The top players, especially in high pick and roll usage situations, if you're sitting in super deep drop coverage, you are liable to giving up pull-up jumpers and pull-up three-pointers at a very, very high clip. And that's what Zikarsky's going to give up a lot of. And you might argue that that's a good thing because any shot that's not right at the rim is technically less efficient. But if they're wide open pull-up threes to the best players in the world, that is going to be a problem. So I think Zikarsky could be a really good piece for regular season winning. You look at some of the best teams throughout the last couple of years in the NBA, typically teams with a lot of size and a lot of rim deterrence are typically better NBA regular season teams because they push you away from the rim, make you shoot longer shots, and they typically will end in more misses. But at the same time, come playoff time, we've seen that type of strategy fail a little bit. Rudy Gobert at times has been attacked in the playoffs. Now, I think that the narrative is really misspoken on him. I think if you go back and turn on the tape against the Phoenix Suns this year with Booker, Durant, and Beal, you'll see Rudy Gobert dominate that series. But at times against Dallas, you saw Luka Doncic pick on Rudy Gobert. So there is a little bit of truth to it. You look at, I think the most extreme example is Brook Lopez in Milwaukee. he's been really, really bad the last couple of playoffs. And honestly, like, I know it's Brook Lopez. He's not a huge name, doesn't get talked about probably as much as it should. The Milwaukee Bucks have a Brook Lopez problem defensively. Even though he's a great defender and he deters the rim, come playoff time, he has been picked on. He got picked on by Indiana in the pick and pop between Halliburton and Miles Turner. And he got picked on a year ago by Jimmy Butler in the mid-range. And I think when it comes to Golden State here selecting Zikarsky, I think there's a lot of those like downsides I just talked about with Brook Lopez getting picked on in certain elements. That's what Zikarsky's going to be liable to. He plays in deep drop coverage. The lateral mobility is not great. Now, I do like his upside as a short roll passer. I like his upside, especially with his hands. That's something I do have to mention. As a roller, he can catch the ball really, really well, both above the rim, above his head on lobs, and also kind of around his waist. Now, obviously, anything to a 7'2+ guy, if you're throwing it at his knees, he's probably not going to catch the ball. But throwing it to his waist and above, he's going to catch the rock pretty consistently, and then he can play make out of that a little bit. I think the touch really does still need some work, and obviously the functional play strength isn't there quite yet either. This is a project pick, but I think for Golden State, a team that is so little, so small, getting a huge big body in the middle could kind of transform the way that their defense operates and works, and it would give them a real chance to kind of shake up their team a little bit in a beneficial way. Pick number 12, we move on to the Houston Rockets. This pick comes from the Phoenix Suns, who I do not think are slated to have a great year. We'll see what happens. I'm just not a huge believer in their roster. Now, I do think Mike Budenholzer does help them win regular season games for sure. So we'll see where they go. But ultimately, Houston, here at this point in time, gets to add upside. And they draft center/forward Noah Essengue from Ratiopharm. Also had a really strong season debut, playing alongside Ben Saraf, who we mentioned earlier at pick number 4. Essengue is an interesting prospect and one I could see Ime Udoka really, really liking. He's a big man with some shot-making upside, shot 3 threes in his debut, made one of them, and I think that confidence as a three-point shooter was definitely something that was on display in that game, something that I think a year ago probably wouldn't have been as confident shooting 3 threes in his minutes like he did in his season debut this past year. And I think we've seen some real growth from him as a player overall. I think going back a year ago, watching his tape from the last 12 months, he's a player that I think at times was relatively weak when it comes to his play strength, and also struggled to really finish with touch consistently. I think those are areas where we've seen him grow over time and evolve as a player. And that's one of the things when you're looking at and watching 17, 18-year-old basketball prospects, these guys are not finished products. So Essengue, the reason you're drafting him here if you're Houston, if you don't trade this pick, which I think would be very likely, by the way, is the fact that you believe that down the road, within 2-3 years, he could become a really unique player with size, rim protection upside, athleticism. You could stretch the floor with him a little bit, which would be different than what they have currently with Steven Adams as a backup center. Now, we'll see what happens. I have a video covering the Houston Rockets and potentially why Steven Adams might not be there long term. So make sure to go check that video out as well. It's up on the channel. But Essengue is an interesting prospect for sure, no doubt about it. I just am a little unsure exactly on how his season's going to unfold at this point in time, and if Houston's actually going to be looking for a backup big man or not. But this is a long-term project upside pick here for Houston, and one I could see themselves being talked into depending on how they look to operate this upcoming offseason. Pick number 13, the New Orleans Pelicans here now. This pick comes from the Los Angeles Lakers. And with the 13th overall pick, I have the New Orleans Pelicans selecting wing Egor Demin from BYU. The Russian prospect, I think, has an interesting ability to play off the catch. And for New Orleans, this is a very fascinating team as well right now that I do want to talk about a little bit longer here. When we talk about New Orleans, I know people are going to point to the center situation. They drafted Yves Missi this past year. They have Daniel Tice right now. Who knows if they're going to actually start a center or not. Maybe they play small. They have a collection of wings and guards currently with CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy III, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson. Those are their top 6 players. And the tallest one of them is probably Brandon Ingram, around like 6'8", 6'9". They're kind of a smaller team, but they're a fast team. They're a team that has a lot of switchability, a lot of length, a lot of defense. So why would I have them draft a wing here in Egor Demin? And why not a big man? Well, one, I think that internally they obviously believe in Yves Missi a lot, who they just drafted in this past draft in 2024. They like his long-term upside. They like his rim finishing. They like his above-the-rim lob threat. play, and I think with his athleticism and how raw he was going into the last draft cycle, I think that there's a lot of belief he could really blossom as a player, which I believe as well. I think there's a chance that if New Orleans develops him properly, he could turn into a real monster for them as kind of a Clint Capella-esque type big man, which would be very, very fascinating to see if it does come to fruition. Secondly, New Orleans, I think with Brandon Ingram's contract situation coming up, could potentially be looking for more wing depth flat out. Not only do they believe in Yves Missi, but it's possible that they don't want to commit so much money to Brandon Ingram, which would ultimately open them up to potentially losing him in free agency for nothing within the next 9 to 10 months. So that's one of the reasons why I do have New Orleans here looking at a wing. Egor Demin, I think, is going to have a good season for himself at BYU. Obviously, new coaching staff there at Brigham Young, and obviously a lot of changing pieces as well with Jackson Robinson out. A lot of movement for BYU over the last couple of years, for sure. But I think the Pelicans here, getting Demin, someone who has perimeter skill set that I think is emerging, growing in certain ways. The shot-making potential is definitely noticeable with Demin as well. I think he's a player that with a strong year could really solidify himself as a lottery pick. Now, I'm not 100% sold that he is at this point in time, but with where we're currently at, again, preseason edition here, I think Demin's an interesting prospect to at least monitor at this point in time. Pick number 14, the Atlanta Hawks here. Now, this pick comes from the Sacramento Kings, who I think are going to have a good year. The Kings, I think, are a really solid, strong team. We'll see what happens with them. But Atlanta here at this spot, I think another team that, they acquired Dyson Daniels. They made the DeJounte Murray trade. They got Zachary Sachet. I'm just not sure the Hawks are going to be that good, to be completely transparent. But 14th overall, I have them selecting guard Trey Johnson from Texas. This is a big-time upside swing. The 6'6" combo guard with real athleticism, 3-level scoring upside. He's I think what most people would call a pure bucket getter. He's got a handle. He's got the ability to elevate into his shot and score from 15 feet, from 22 feet. Obviously, I think adjusting the NBA range would be a little bit of a growth process for him, which is why I have him in the end of the lottery here in this mock draft. He's another player with Texas here. I think the last couple of years, they've had a lot of guard upside. They've had a lot of guard talent. You think even back to like a Marcus Carr, for example. They've had players who can score the basketball out of the backcourt. They haven't had that 19-year-old version of it, though. That young, springy athlete like Trey Johnson is. And I'm excited to see how his season progresses this upcoming year. I think he's a player who, if things go really well for him, he could definitely turn into a top 7, top 8 pick in this upcoming draft cycle. This is another player where we have to monitor the efficiency. Anyone who's going to be living on more difficult shot diet, playing off the live dribble more frequently, looking to score for himself in isolation at times or out of the pick and roll, you're just probably a little bit more prone to having a less efficient scoring season and especially shooting splits in general. But the upside's there, the potential's there, and with Atlanta trading DeJounte Murray, it does open up their backcourt a little bit. They do have Kobe Buffkin still, who I did like pre-draft in his draft class. So we'll see how things develop and mature here for Atlanta this upcoming season and for Trey Johnson himself as well. Texas didn't get A.J. Johnson 2 years ago. They get Trey Johnson this year, and we'll see if he can really have a good season for Atlanta this upcoming year, or for Texas this upcoming year. Pick number 15, the Oklahoma City Thunder here. Now this pick comes from the Houston Rockets, and with this selection I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting guard/forward Knueppel from Duke. And I talked about Coach Shire having so many different options this year. I think Knueppel is one of the most important options John Shire has, and one that I hope he really leans into. I think shooting is going to be very, very vital around Maluach, around Cooper Flagg, around Tyrese Proctor, around that core nucleus there of top-end talent that Duke has on their roster. Obviously, they've got a lot of new names. They've got a lot of talent. Sion James, another transfer that they got as well. But I think the true freshman here, Knueppel, who coming out of Wisconsin Lutheran High School, he's a player I think that is going to be really, really useful for Duke because of his floor spacing, the ability to willingly play off the catch and shoot opportunities, and just take what the defense gives him. And that's something that I think OKC, who doesn't really have a lot of needs right now, remember, I think with their 4 first-round picks, OKC would be best served going out and making multiple trades in this upcoming draft cycle. If they do stick and pick, someone like Knueppel makes sense for them because around their core nucleus of players, around a Chet Holmgren, around a J-Dub, around an SGA, having guys who are just willing to operate and play in their singular role of Knueppel goes on the floor, he knows he's supposed to defend, catch and shoot threes. That's what he's going to provide. And for OKC, I think the better floor spacing, I think getting an added dose of three-point shooting would be very valuable for them. Obviously with Alex Caruso, Isaiah Hartenstein in there's not a lot of rotational minutes going around, but they could use more shooting. They kept Isaiah Joe. I really like that contract for OKC. They kept Aaron Wiggins. I like him as well. The Thunder is just getting a good player who fits your roster, and that's what Knueppel does here for them just outside of the lottery. Pick number 16, the Pelicans back on the clock again here with this selection. I think New Orleans, after drafting Egor Demin at the end of the lottery just a couple of picks ago, they now come back here and select forward Collin Murray-Boyles from South Carolina. And this is another interesting one where you're adding kind of this undersized, bigger-bodied player into your team. We've seen this story a little bit with Zion Williamson. Now, Collin Murray-Boyles is a very different player, not quite the athlete that Zion is. I don't even need to reiterate that. You guys know the difference here. But Murray-Boyles, I think with his ability to play strong, he's got a big, bulky, burly body, can play in contact while standing about 6'7". I think his sophomore year at South Carolina is going to be really interesting. There was a lot of buzz for CMB this past draft cycle. I think a lot of people were even saying maybe a potential lottery pick, which I wasn't exactly there on. I kind of thought he would be a kind of fringe top 20-ish pick had he come into the 2024 NBA draft. He chose to return to South Carolina, go into his sophomore season, and now he's poised to have a really good year, a year with a lot of growth, a year where he can show off a lot of his self-development, and then obviously take some of those steps forward in his own game, both as an interior scorer. Hopefully we see some more of that perimeter skill set evolve as well. I think defensively, that's going to be another key area where we need to see CMB have a successful season for the Gamecocks to really stand out as a top 20 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Again, when you're making a preseason edition of a mock draft, you're trying to guess what's going to happen, right? You're trying to guess what players are going to have a great season, which players are maybe going to poise themselves or set themselves up for some success throughout the college year or throughout their, professional seasons overseas. So CMB, very interesting prospect here. I think New Orleans, again, if they're looking at adding size into their front court and not just height, but I'm talking weight, strength, and play strength especially, Murray-Boyles is an interesting prospect for them to grab here, 16th overall. Pick number 17, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder here. I'm not even going to spoil it for you, selecting Jalil Bethea from Miami. Really, really love this. This pick comes from a swap with the Clippers, and I think Jalil Bethea, I'm so excited to talk about him. He is so dynamic. This is the type of combo guard that Miami, they've had some real names over the past couple of years. You think about Keyshawn George, think about Hugo Poplar. They've had some names, and they've had some really talented players. They've had some really talented backcourts as well over the last couple of years. Jalil Bethea might be the king edition of that for the Hurricanes. He is the type of player that if things go really well for him, he could turn himself into a high lottery pick, a top 7, top 8 pick, if the efficiency's there and if he has the type of season I think he could theoretically have. Now, it's hard to bet on that because, again, you're looking at the shot creation dosage. You're looking at, how efficient is he actually going to be as a true freshman. There's a lot of things you could be concerned about, which is why he kind of falls down a little bit in my mock draft here to 17. But I'm really excited about him. I think if there's a player so far that I've talked about that could go way higher than I currently have him mocked, Jalil Bethea could be the answer to that question because of his dynamic athleticism, shot-making potential. I'm just really, really excited about Jalil Bethea, the speed with the ball, the ability to handle the rock, and then play and score off of a live dribble. Anytime, you guys know my draft philosophy, or dribble, pass, shoot. If you have players who are capable of accomplishing those three things, if they're high-quality dribblers who can pass a bit with a live handle and then can really score the rock, those are players that you want to build teams around. And for OKC here, again, a team that I think will likely make multiple trades on draft night, Jalil Bethea could be this really fun, high upside, let's draft him and see what we actually have with him type of pick. Now, OKC doesn't really have the roster spots for all these guys. We'll see what happens, but Jalil Bethea, really, really fun draft prospect, one I like quite a bit. Pick number 18. We're still on the topic of Oklahoma City. This pick comes from the Miami Heat at number 18. I have them selecting guard/forward Jackson Robinson. And I've got one word for you here. Wingspan, wingspan, wingspan. At about 6'6", 6'5", he had a 7-foot wingspan. His arm, as Jay Billis would say, go on for days. He's got such a long wingspan. And with Mark Pope moving from BYU to Kentucky, Jackson Robinson mirrored that move by also transferring out from BYU, going to Kentucky himself, and now will have a real opportunity to be a lead primary scoring option for the Wildcats in the SEC the first year without Coach Calipari. And Kentucky still could be producing a first-round draft pick type player here in Jackson Robinson. I think with his height and especially the length that he possesses as a wing kind of option, he's going to be really, really dynamic this upcoming year. He had a really great year for BYU last year. I think had he stayed in the 2024 NBA draft, there was a really good chance he would have been a top 40 pick. Ended up not staying in the draft, and I think now moving to Kentucky with his former head coach to Kentucky, he's just going to be poised to have a really strong season. A lot of eyes are going to be on him. People are always watching Kentucky. The Wildcats are on national TV all of the time. I think there's going to be a lot of buzz, a lot of hype for Jackson Robinson. We'll see how far that carries him, how far that moves him throughout the draft this upcoming year. But I'm excited about him, and I'm excited about the season he's going to have this upcoming season. Pick number 19, the Orlando Magic here now. And with this selection, I have the Orlando Magic selecting Aaron Bradshaw out of Ohio State. Did someone say Khalil Ware? Not quite. That's not the same player as Khalil Ware at all, really. But Aaron Bradshaw, after transferring out from Kentucky, I thought there's a good chance he was going to go to Arkansas. Ended up taking a visit to Ohio State and committed to Ohio State. And think about Khalil Ware, who transferred from Oregon after kind of a letdown freshman season, ended up having a tremendous sophomore season with the Hoosiers in the Big Ten, and ended up being a top 15 draft pick in the 2024 NBA draft. I think Aaron Bradshaw could follow a similar pathway, moving to a Big Ten-oriented game where inside play matters even a little bit more than in the SEC, than in the ACC. The big man is very, very relevant in the Big Ten, and I think Aaron Bradshaw is going to be a centerpiece for them, not only defensively at Ohio State, but also very involved offensively as potentially a lob catcher, a high-volume post-up option at times, which would be interesting to see him play in that style. It's something I don't think he's going to be elite at, like Khalil Ware was for the Hoosiers, but something I think that his team especially will lean on at certain times, especially just with the style of Big Ten play. And he's going to have some big games throughout the year against other Big Ten big men, against other Big Ten opponents as well. You think about the strength of the Big Ten right now, especially with some of the new prospects coming into the fold. It'll be interesting to see Aaron Bradshaw this upcoming year, but I think for Orlando, a team that long-term could just use a little bit more center depth. There's not really a lot of needs right now for the Orlando Magic. Considered a guard here, but after signing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope for a multi-year deal, I don't think that's completely essential for them. Jalen Suggs just is awesome. They drafted Anthony Black in 2023. I think Orlando, after drafting just really, really well over the last couple of years, Tristan da Silva, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, they're just loaded. They got a lot of great wings. They've got a lot of great guards. They need, I think, a little bit more center depth long term, but with their current iteration of their roster, they've got good bigs as well. So it's not like this is like a dire need. This is just a depth selection. And I think Aaron Bradshaw could prove himself as a really interesting Big Ten pickup here for Ohio State this upcoming year. I think he's going to have a good season. And then for Orlando, could be a really nice depth grab in the back end of the first round. Pick number 20, the Indiana Pacers here now at this spot. They're going to go with a Big Ten player as well in forward Will Riley from Illinois. He had an interesting recruitment process, ended up landing on the Fighting Illini, and I think he has a really good chance to be featured there for Illinois this upcoming season. Someone who's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit, with the ability to score, play make a little bit, play off of a live handle. Now, this is another player where if the season doesn't go well, we're not even going to see him probably enter the draft. But he was a very notable high recruit, ends up going to Illinois. The ball is going to be in his hands. You think about, I think the Fighting Illini, especially with some of the moving pieces that they've had over the last couple of years, I just think Will Riley is in a spot here where for Illinois, especially after some of the players that they've been able to produce into the NBA, I would assume new. You think about Kofi Cockburn, who was just tremendous throughout his college career there for them. I think Will Riley's going to be going into a situation here where they lean on him a little bit to score the basketball, and that always just goes a long way. One of the most important things, and this should be really a telltale situation for most any like college recruits in general, going to a spot where you're given the opportunity is sometimes even more important than going around other talent or being somewhere you quote unquote want to be, right? Like having the ball in your hands a lot is going to make you seen, and it's going to give you developmental opportunities. It's going to give you the ability to showcase your talent nationally, and I think that's exactly what Will Riley is going to be able to do this upcoming year at Illinois, which is why I have Indiana, a team that is really poised to make a big trade still. I don't want to get too much into that here, but they have a lot of tradable contracts. They could just be looking for perimeter depth at this point in time, which is why I think Will Riley does make a bit of sense for them, 20th overall. Pick 21, OKC back on the clock again. I'm sure everyone's like, oh my gosh, another Oklahoma City Thunder pick. This time I had them selecting forward Alex Karaban from UConn. I talked about the Huskies in their pursuit of a three-peat. I think Karaban's going to be really at the heart and center of that pursuit. I was actually really shocked he pulled out of the 2024 NBA draft, but I don't think it's going to end up hurting him too much. I saw him as a likely first-round pick in 2024. I still see him as a likely first-round pick in 2025, despite being a year older. I think we're going to see a real uptick in his usage for UConn. And last year, one of the things that really stood out to me every time I watched the UConn Huskies play, just felt like Alex Karaban was making timely play after timely play after timely play. Whether it was a block shot where he either rotates as the weak side guy or chases down his own man if he got beat off the dribble, or if he was catching and shooting an open corner three, or if he was playing off of an action and ended up slipping a screen just perfectly and getting an open layup because he played off of Donovan Clingan out of the center of their offense. Alex Karaban just made a bunch of winning plays back to back to back to back. Very reminiscent to me of what Aaron Wiggins has been doing for OKC the last couple of years, where Aaron Wiggins doesn't come in the game and just do one thing for you. He just is multifaceted, well-versed in doing a little bit of everything. And I think Alex Karaban could fill that similar kind of role here for OKC. Now again, the Thunder are likely going to make a trade. They're not going to probably make 4 first-round picks in the 2025 NBA draft, but with me mocking selections here for them, walking out with guys like Knueppel, Alex Karaban, players who fill certain voids, certain roles for them for relatively cheap rookie contracts, this would be all great for OKC if they're able to at least walk out with maybe 1 or 2 of these guys, trade some of the other picks. We'll see what they do, but OKC is really, really well poised right now. Not only do I think they have the best roster in the Western Conference, but they're also in a spot where they have 4 first-round picks as well to boot. So scary hours right now for the rest of the NBA. Pick 22, the Utah Jazz here now. Remember, earlier in this draft, we had them go with Nolan Traore, 3rd overall. Now where could the Jazz look to go at 22? I have them selecting forward Darian Reed from Alabama. And talk about Nate Oates, one of the best offensive masterminds in college basketball right now. Really optimizes his 5-out spacing with good off-ball movement, player movement, and then obviously ball movement to boot on top of that. Really is able to make it work when he is running 5-out offense, but also has been really willing to work in 4-out offenses as well. A lot of pick and roll ball handling, very just pro style offense, and a big reason why Alabama's been one of the top scoring teams in the nation the last couple of years. Darian Reed, I think, as a true freshman walking into this situation, is going to be given an opportunity to score the ball relatively easily around Clifford Amore, who they got in the transfer portal, around Grant Nelson, who was tremendous for them last season, around Mark Sears, who has real National Player of the Year potential. Darian Reed is walking into a role where they're not going to ask a ton from him, but their offensive design, the overall spacing, the pacing that they play at, I think will all benefit him greatly. And I think Utah, especially a team that before drafting Cody Williams was really, really thin on wings. The more wings, the more length, size, athleticism they can get on their roster, the better. I think Darian Reed fits that for them. And I think depending on how this year goes for him at Alabama, again, a lot of kind of prediction, a lot of kind of guessing on what we're going to see, a lot of projecting here. I think Darian Reed, if the season goes really well for him, we could be talking about him as a maybe fringe lottery pick. Now, I'd be a little surprised if that does happen. I have him at 22 here for a reason. I could see him maybe even not just flat out being a first round pick, but I think the Jazz here, especially a team that could use more wings on their actual roster, more length, size, athleticism, Darian Reed as a high-end recruit does fit some of those characteristics that Danny Ainge could be looking for. Pick 23, the Memphis Grizzlies here now at this spot. I think Memphis, a very fascinating team to talk about after drafting Zach Edey 9th overall. I think a lot of people are not expecting enough out of this team. I think the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be a regular season wins machine. I think with Ja Morant back, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. both having stretched their games a little bit offensively this past year, I think Memphis is going to hit the ground running. They have a center who is very, very dominant in drop coverage with Zach Edey. Like I talked about with Rocco Zikarsky, he deters the rim. And I think Memphis, with him and Jaren Jackson Jr., they have a lot of shot blocking, a lot of rim protection, and they're going to be a really good regular season team again. So Memphis, 23rd overall, I have them selecting center Ihsan Almansa from the NBL, playing for the Perth Wildcats, also Spanish-born prospect, played for G League Ignite last year. And I think he's in the best shape of his life, honestly. Looking at him as a draft prospect, I've been watching him for a few years now. He is just, I think, constantly improving his actual endurance, his ability to stay on the floor, play higher load, higher minutes. And I think with that, you're seeing some more athleticism from him on display. Going back a couple of years in tape, you watch him, and a lot of his reps that he won or made great plays were oftentimes out of kind of footwork and winning with his IQ. And he's still capable of doing that, but I think we're seeing that athleticism bounce a little bit more on film. You're seeing him just kind of uptick a little bit as an athlete with him being in better shape. And then I think for Memphis here, especially under their current regime, they've been looking at skilled size for a while. They drafted Zach Edey last year. You go back a few drafts, they drafted Santi Aldama 30th overall, who is a kind of skilled wing type 7-footer. Ihsan Almansa is kind of the hybrid of that, right? Like, he's got playmaking feel as like a 6'10" big man. He's probably not going to be the best defender, but he's got playmaking feel. He's got upside, and he's got some positionless talents that I think could be really useful around a Ja Morant. If you want Ihsan Almansa to be your short roll guy, I think he could play out of the pocket extremely well. This is an interesting pick here for the Grizzlies. Now, will Almansa end up being an actual first-round pick? I'm not exactly certain on that. But I do think 23rd overall right now, again, preseason before the college year really gets to a start, I think Almansa is an interesting name to monitor, at the very least as a potential fringe first-round pick, and I think Memphis is an interesting landing spot for him here in this mock draft. Pick 24, the Brooklyn Nets here now. Remember, they got Ace Bailey 2nd overall toward the beginning of this mock draft. Now at 24, I have them selecting guard Mark Sears out of Alabama. And this is one of those fascinating situations, right? Brooklyn, with them taking Ace Bailey, maybe that super high upside offensive dynamo that they could potentially get at the top of the draft. They passed on a bunch of guards. They passed on Ben Saraf. They passed on Nolan Traore. They passed on Dylan Harper. Yes, that hurts, but you come back and you get a really good guard here. Someone who I know all draft cycle long is going to be undervalued in Mark Sears because he's little, because he's an older prospect, and because his game's not super flashy. Everyone is going to overlook Mark Sears. Here's the thing, and this is what Brooklyn needs to adopt. This is what teams like the Washington Wizards need to adopt. When you have a bunch of picks in the 20s and later, draft good basketball players. Right now, with everyone on the board, I think no one would really even argue, present day, currently, Mark Sears is the best basketball player available in this upcoming draft at pick 24 or later. And maybe not long-term, maybe not potential-wise, but right now, could Brooklyn really use a good, young-ish point guard? 100% they could. And I think Mark Sears could play real minutes for Brooklyn, maybe whether that be as a backup point guard or as like a low-quality starter. 110% he could play minutes for them. And I think if you're looking at the way the Brooklyn Nets need to build, they need to find upside at the top of the draft. They need to find the guys who could become faces of their franchise, and then they need to surround those faces of the franchise with maturity and winning players. And I think Mark Sears is a mature player who really, really values winning and plays to win games. I talked about how Alabama's offense is going to be predicated around Mark Sears again this upcoming year with talented players like Grant Nelson, Cliff Amore around him. Mark Sears is just really, really good. And I think if you get him in the NBA, you place him in a role where his job's going to be a little bit easier than it's been at Alabama, you're going to get a really controlled point guard, someone who can play within the role that you need him to play in. He can control your offense. He's got the footwork to make it work despite being smaller. I know there's obviously some concerns about the physicals compared to other long-term upside prospects. Brooklyn drafting a good player right now, I think would be a really good decision for them, and it would help blossom their development for guys like Ace Bailey and for some of the other young pieces that they look to add over the next couple of years as well. Pick 25, the Dallas Mavericks here now, a team that I think a lot of people are really interested in seeing how they play this upcoming year. After a trip to the NBA Finals this past year, some people are really optimistic about them, thinking that they have a really good chance to make it back there. And some people are very pessimistic, saying that they sacrificed too much of their defense, giving up Derrick Jones Jr. and bringing in Klay Thompson instead, despite getting Najee Marshall, who is flat out a better defender than Derrick Jones Jr. is anyway. I think, yes, the Mavericks did lose a little bit of athleticism for sure, but I think on paper the Mavericks have improved. I think their offense has taken a big step forward, adding Klay Thompson. And I think with Najee Marshall playing 20-ish minutes a night, they have one of the better perimeter defenders in the league, one of the most underrated perimeter defenders in the league. They're waiting in the fold behind Klay, and on nights that Klay Thompson is out of the lineup for whatever reason that may be, I think Najee Marshall is going to be able to step up big time. The Mavericks have two really good centers. I think that they're in a spot where, again, having skilled size, having size that can protect the rim especially, helps you win a lot of regular season games. The Mavericks have that right now. 25th overall, I have them selecting an upside forward in Mackenzie Mbako from Indiana. Hoosier here, who his freshman season didn't go super great for the Hoosiers, point blank. Didn't have an efficient year, didn't have a great year, but I think going into year two with kind of a couple of shifts in their offense, the departure of Khalil Ware, who we've already talked about in this mock draft, I think Mbako could be in a spot where he's relied on a little bit more, maybe finds a little bit more of a rhythm and a consistency earlier in the season, and after a full year of adjusting to college basketball, maybe finds himself again as that highly touted recruit that he was going into his freshman season. Maybe he finds that player in his sophomore campaign. That's what I'm really looking for, and excited to see if he is able to reach that kind of play as a collegiate player, because the athleticism's there, the size, the length, the wingspan's all there. It's just about, is the skill set truly there enough to become a consistent offensive player? And for Dallas here, again, it's an upside pick on the defense, on the length, the athleticism, and obviously the pedigree as a former highly touted recruit. This is a player who, if you're picking the end of the first round, you're looking to surround Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving with athleticism, guys who can make plays defensively, run the break in transition. Mackenzie Mbako has a lot of those athletic tools. Can he just, again, offensively put it all together to make himself a draft-worthy prospect in the first round? I think right now he's one of those prospects, out of everyone I've mocked so far, he's the prospect I have the least long-term confidence in, but also I have to acknowledge the upside, and if he does put things together here in year two, I will be very quick to change my approach on that, depending on how the season starts for him and the Hoosiers at this point in time. Pick 26, the Utah Jazz on the clock again. This pick comes from the Minnesota Timberwolves, part of the Rudy Gobert trade, the trade that, yes, pushed the Minnesota Timberwolves to a conference finals berth, and the Jazz for the top of mock drafts. Pick 26, the Utah Jazz, I have selecting forward Andre Stojakovic from Cal. I had a lot of expectations for Stojakovic going into his freshman season for Stanford. Unfortunately, he did not deliver on a lot of those expectations I had, and I was left a little disappointed. But after Jalen Tyson had a really great season this past year for Cal, ended up becoming a first-round pick in the 2024 NBA draft, a lot of usage, a lot of role is left on the table for Cal this upcoming year. And I think with Stojakovic transferring in to play for the Bears, there's a really good chance here that he absorbs a lot of that usage, a lot of that role of working off of DHOs, working off of set plays to look to score the basketball. And I think that's where Andre Stojakovic could be really, really productive for Cal this upcoming year. He can really shoot the basketball. That's probably his 1A strength as a draft prospect right now. And then the ability to play out of advantage, I think, is his secondary skill set that for Cal, his shooting gravity and his floor spacing ability paired with good offensive design, I think is going to lead him to being a potential first-round pick. Again, I'm not extremely confident that Stojakovic will hold this kind of draft stock throughout the course of the entire season, But as of right now, I do think the potential is there for him to be a first-round pick if things go well and if he does fully absorb that Jalen Tyson role, at least to some degree. Maybe not even fully absorb it, but maybe absorb 70% of that role. And if he does take in that role, he's going to have a really productive season where I could see him scoring 15 to 20 points per game for Cal, which is a really, really strong season for a sophomore type player. And one that, with the name recognition, being the son of Pate Stojakovic, could definitely get him drafted in the first round. Pick number 27, the Orlando Magic. On the clock again, this pick comes from the Denver Nuggets. So remember, at 19 we went with Aaron Bradshaw out of Ohio State. 27th overall now we go with guard Hunter Sallis from Wake Forest. And Sallis is one of those really interesting draft prospects for me. I remember mocking him in the Chet Holmgren draft back in what I believe was 2022. I remember mocking Hunter Sallis as a potential top 10 pick in my way too early mock draft leading into 2022. So it was basically June of 2021 when I mocked that. Hunter Sallis, unfortunately, did not have a great freshman season that year for Gonzaga. Ended up transferring out of Gonzaga completely and finally really found himself this past year for Wake Forest. He declared for the draft, ended up withdrawing from the draft, and I think a lot of the reason why teams weren't super really willing to commit to him quite yet as a draft prospect was the lack of consistency on his three-point shot especially. Last year he had a tremendous shooting season for Wake Forest, but his previous track record suggested that maybe he wasn't going to be the most reliable three-point shooter. As a guard, that is terrifying, and I know right now Orlando Magic fans are probably shuddering a little bit thinking about Markelle Fultz getting guarded by centers as a point guard. I don't think that's going to be the case here for Hunter Sallis. I do think with a strong season this upcoming year for Wake, he could really solidify himself as a true first-round pick. He's got solid positional size, around 6'5". He's got some playmaking feel. He's got the scoring gravity, and as long as that three-point shot continues to fall, he will likely be looked at as, at worst, a fringe first-round pick, if not just flat-out a first-round selection on draft night here in 2025. Moving on to pick number 28, the Brooklyn Nets on the clock once again. Remember, so far we've gone with Ace Bailey and then Mark Sears in the 20s here. Now at pick 28, the Brooklyn Nets. This pick comes from the New York Knicks, part of that Mikal Bridges trade we referenced earlier. Now at this spot, they select forward Kwame Evans Jr. from Oregon. So I harped on the Nets getting a good player, getting a really good basketball player in Mark Sears. This is where you take maybe that upside swing on a player with real defensive flexibility, can guard multiple different positions. At the college rank, we'll probably see him guard predominantly 1 through 4. In the NBA, I think we would probably most likely see him defend 2 through 4 and be comfortable switching onto ones if asked to. Kwame Evans Jr., good athlete, I think is poised to have a really strong sophomore season. Kind of in the same boat as Mackenzie Mbako in some ways. Didn't have the freshman season I think a lot of people were hoping for or expecting to see from him. But the defensive versatility is there. The ability to guard across multiple positions, which is super important in today's game, especially with lineup flexibility and how teams are playing smaller, quicker sometimes. Some teams are electing to play bigger, faster, or bigger, stronger in certain ways. You think about Minnesota with 2 bigs. You think about Denver with Aaron Gordon, for example. Now, obviously, Brooklyn probably not really eyeing to beat some of those teams right now. But over the course of the next few years, if you can get Kwame Evans to develop as an offensive player, continue to really grow as a three-point shooter especially, you could find this intriguing prospect here in Kwame Evans Jr., who, with the defensive versatility and improvements to his offensive game, could really warrant a back end of the first-round pick in 2025. Pick number 29, the LA Clippers here now at this spot. This pick is a swap with the OKC Thunder. Remember, the Thunder executed that swap themselves in the top 20 earlier in this mock draft. Now at this selection, the Los Angeles Clippers select Zachary Perrin from France, a left-handed big man who had a pretty interesting offseason. I think has started to really make some waves around the NBA. I think more NBA executives, GMs, and scouts especially are starting to pay more and more attention to this kid. I think from a size, strength, and skill facet, I think there's a lot of intrigue right now. And if he can put together a strong season for himself, we could definitely see him as a real riser. He was not included in my way too early 2025 first-round mock draft. That was something that needed to be altered and adjusted because of the last couple of months he's had. I think there's been more and more buzz circling around him lately. And I think Perrin's a player who, for the Clippers, this is the type of draft player that they typically look for. A big with some potential to stretch the floor a little bit for them, shoot the basketball just a bit, You think back to guys like Daniel Aturu, Fiondu Kabanyele, and I know Clippers fans are probably maybe clicking off the video right now because they're like, why are you mentioning all of our draft busts, right? Like, but this is the type of player the Clippers have looked for. They've looked for a big man who has some of that perimeter skill set and the ability to play in multiple different styles for them. They have Zubac on a long-term extension. I'm sure the Clippers would love to add more talent into their front court. It's been kind of a revolving door as the backup center behind Zubac since letting Isaiah Hartenstein go for John Wall, by the way. Terrible decision. But the Clippers at 29, maybe they find that stopgap for them here in Perrin out of France. Pick number 30, the Boston Celtics, the team I expect to win the NBA championship again this upcoming season. I expect them to repeat. I just flat out think they're the best team on paper. I find it almost impossible to defend them. I think drafting Baylor Shireman was a really savvy, smart move by Brad Stevens. And I think the Celtics, with everyone coming back into the fold, despite how expensive their roster is, I think every penny's worth it when you're really contending and likely going to win another NBA championship. 30th overall, I have the Boston Celtics selecting forward Asa Newell from Georgia. And I think this is one of the players with some of the most upside out of everyone we've talked about so far. I see some people, I don't really go and look for mock drafts. I don't typically search them out, but at times, I'm scrolling on social media. I see them pop up on my For You page every once in a while, right? And Asa Newell is a player I've seen some people as optimistic as mocking him in the top 10. And I understand it from a size, length, athleticism component. A former top recruit going into this year, he's going to have an opportunity at Georgia to maybe show out a little bit as a true freshman, which would be exciting to see for sure. He would be fascinating as a prospect for Boston here, because I think as they obviously value spacing so much, getting players with some real athletic traits, like they drafted Jordan Walsh a couple of years ago, who with his defensive upside and his length overall is just so impressive. And then adding in like an Asa Newell around him, another guy with length, size, athletic traits, like it's just exciting to put those types of players around a lot of skill. The Celtics already have the skill areas on their roster with their core 5 starters, and then drafting Baylor Shireman I thought was really smart. They have Xavier Tillman off the bench. They've got a lot of skill. They've got some good athletes like Luke Cornett, who obviously offers a ton of size for them. Jordan Walsh, and then also Asa Newell. They've had J.D. Davison sitting around as a two-way player for a while too. So the Celtics, very, very fascinating. They've got a lot of talent presently, and then maybe taking an upside swing on a guy like Asa Newell here could do them wonders. I really hope you guys did enjoy this mock draft. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. If you have any comments, comment them down below. I read every single comment on the channel, so let me know your thoughts down below. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.